I was 25 years old, but sometimes I felt much older. Life in my city moved fast. Buses honking, people rushing to work, shops opening and closing like clockwork. But mine had settled into a quiet rhythm. Most mornings began before sunrise. I would wake to the faint buzz of my alarm clock, the smell of strong tea drifting from the kitchen, and the weight of another day ahead. My life wasn't luxurious, not even close, but it was steady, and that steadiness was what gave me comfort. I worked as a school teacher in a small village 5 kilometers away from my city. To many people, 5 kilometers might sound like a short distance, but for me, that ride meant so much more. It was a line between two different worlds, one noisy and crowded, the other calm and simple. Each day, I would hop on my old motorbike, its engine groaning like a stubborn friend, and ride down the narrow road that connected me to the village. The journey itself was lonely. Sometimes I would meet a farmer walking with his oxen or children herding goats, but mostly it was just me, the road, and the steady hum of the engine beneath me. I had chosen teaching not because it was easy or glamorous, but because it felt meaningful. Ever since I was young, I had admired my own teachers, the way they could change the course of someone's life with patience, guidance, and a kind word. My parents had wanted me to choose something more practical, something that promised a better salary, but my heart had settled on this path long before I graduated. And even though the pay barely covered my rent and daily needs, the satisfaction I found in the classroom was worth more than money. The village school where I taught was small, almost fragile, standing on the edge of open fields. Its walls were faded, the paint peeling in places, but the moment you walked inside, the place seemed to come alive. The laughter of children filled every corner, turning cracks into something almost beautiful. The students adored me, not because I was perfect, but because I treated them as if their voices mattered. I remembered their names, their dreams, their struggles. Some of them came from families who barely had enough to eat. Yet every morning they carried notebooks with the kind of pride you'd expect from someone holding treasure. I used to tell them, knowledge is the only thing no one can steal from you. Their eyes would shine when I said that. I could see in them a hunger to become more, to break out of the smallness of the village and discover the world. Perhaps that was what drove me the most, the hope that, through me, they might find a door to something better. Still, life wasn't easy. Traveling back and forth every day took its toll. There were mornings when my bike refused to start, evenings when the road was so dark I could barely see ahead. There were days when the heat burned the asphalt beneath me, and days when the cold wind cut into my skin. And yet, no matter the season, I kept going. That road had become both my burden and my companion. I often wondered why I felt so attached to this life of solitude. Maybe it was because I had never really fit into the fast-moving city around me. My friends had chosen different paths. Corporate jobs, business ventures, marriages, responsibilities I hadn't yet embraced. I was proud of them, but I felt different, as though I was standing outside looking in. The classroom was the one place where I belonged without question. But deep inside, I carried a quiet ache I never confessed to anyone. At 25, I hadn't yet found someone who understood me beyond the surface. My days were filled with routine, but my nights were filled with silence. Sometimes I would lie awake, wondering if this was all my life would be. Teaching, traveling, sleeping, and repeating it all again. And though I never admitted out loud, I longed for a moment, just one unexpected turn, that would make everything different. I didn't know it then, but life has a way of answering us when we least expect it. Sometimes, change doesn't come with warning. Sometimes it comes like a storm, sudden and fierce, leaving you no choice but to surrender to it. At that time, I thought the greatest challenge of my life was making sure the children passed their exams, keeping my bike running on a broken road, or saving enough to fix the leaky roof in my rented apartment. I thought my days would continue in the same rhythm forever, but I was wrong. Very soon, I would discover that destiny has a way of finding you, even on the most ordinary of evenings. And that discovery began with a rainstorm that changed the course of my life forever. That afternoon, school ended like any other day. The children ran out of the small building with their laughter echoing across the fields, chasing each other until the dust rose behind them. I lingered a little longer, packing my notes and checking the register one last time before locking up. By the time I wheeled my bike onto the dirt road, I noticed the sky had darkened. Thick gray clouds had gathered, their edges heavy and swollen with rain. At first, I thought I could beat the storm if I rode quickly. The air was still warm, but there was an uneasiness in it, a silence that made the birds restless in the trees. I tightened the strap of my bag across my shoulder, kicked my bike to life, and started the familiar journey back toward the city. The first drop hit my cheek like a cold warning, then another, and within minutes, the heavens opened up. Sheets of rain came crashing down, blurring the road ahead of me. The wind roared, tearing through the fields on either side, bending the tall grass until it lay flat against the earth. My shirt clung to my skin, soaked through in seconds. I squinted, leaning forward, hoping the storm would pass quickly. But it didn't. The rain only grew heavier, drumming against my helmet, splashing into my eyes. The road beneath me turned slick, and every time my tires slipped in the mud, my heart leapt into my throat. My old bike wasn't made for battles like this. The engine coughed, struggled, and finally, with a shudder, it gave up. I cursed under my breath and tried to restart it. The kick pedal resisted, stiff with water and grime. I tried again, each time more desperate than the last. The only sound was the rain hammering the ground and the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the sky. My hands were numb. My clothes clung like a second skin, and mud splashed up to my knees as I struggled to push the bike off the main track. The road was empty. No travelers, no carts, no shelter in sight. The village was already behind me, and the city still felt far away. I could see nothing but fields stretching endlessly into the horizon. The loneliness of it sank in. I was just one small figure caught in the downpour, helpless against the vastness of nature. Time dragged on as I tried to free the tires from the thick mud. My fingers slipped, my arms ached, and still the bike refused to move. Water pooled around my boots, and every breath I took tasted of rain. My frustration grew into a kind of quiet despair. What if the engine wouldn't start at all? What if I had to abandon the bike here, in the middle of nowhere? The sky darkened further as evening crept in. The light faded into a dim, gray-blue haze, and with each passing minute, the world around me seemed to close in. My city felt impossibly distant, the thought of reaching home almost laughable now. I wiped the water from my eyes and looked down the endless stretch of road. A strange fear settled in my chest, not just of being stranded, but of being unseen, of disappearing into the storm, forgotten by everyone. I had never felt so small, so utterly at the mercy of something I couldn't control. I tightened my grip on the handlebars, breathing hard, and told myself to hold on. There had to be a way out. There always was. But as I stood there, drenched and shivering, I realized I was waiting, not just for the rain to stop, but for something, someone, to appear. And then, almost as if the storm itself had heard my silent prayer, I saw him, a lone figure on horseback, cutting through the curtain of rain, his outline tall and steady against the chaos. A cowboy. I didn't know it yet, but his arrival would change everything. Through the wall of rain, I blinked, uncertain if my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But the sound came first, the steady clop of hooves, muffled by the wet earth. Then the figure emerged, cutting through the gray haze like something out of another world. He was astride a tall horse, its mane slick with rain, its powerful legs carrying it easily over the muddy ground where my bike had failed. The rider sat straight, unshaken by the storm, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the rain. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about the way he moved, as if the storm bent around him instead of swallowing him whole. For a moment, I just stared. He looked like he had stepped out of an old painting, rugged, self-assured, every inch the cowboy. His jacket clung to his broad shoulders, water dripping from the brim of his hat. When his eyes finally found me, drenched, shivering, and clinging helplessly to a useless bike, he slowed his horse and gave me the kind of smile that felt oddly steady in the chaos. "You look like you're fighting a losing battle," he called over the roar of the rain. His voice was deep but carried warmth, the kind of tone that could be both teasing and kind at once. I tried to laugh, though it came out more like a cough. You could say that. I gestured at the bike, its tires half buried in the mud. She's not going anywhere tonight. The cowboy tugged gently on his reins, bringing his horse closer. This road won't get any kinder after dark. My house is nearby. You should come with me. Wait out the storm. It'll be safer than standing out here. I hesitated. My first instinct was caution. I didn't know this man, didn't know his family, didn't know what lay hidden behind his easy smile. The city had taught me to be careful, to question kindness when it came too quickly. But then another clap of thunder shook the sky, and a fresh sheet of rain lashed across my face, blinding me for a moment. I looked back at the empty road stretching behind me. No one else was coming. No carts, no buses, no lights. Just the storm. My bike, stubborn and silent, was proof I couldn't make it alone. The cowboy must have seen the hesitation in my eyes. He leaned forward slightly, his hat shadowing his face, but not hiding the sincerity in his expression. "It's not far," he said again, gentler this time. "You'll dry off, get some food, and tomorrow you can try again. No use drowning out here when shelter's just down the road." There was something disarming about the way he spoke, not pushy, not insistent, but steady, almost reassuring. I wanted to resist, to tell him I would manage on my own, but the truth was I couldn't. My arms ached from fighting with the bike, and the cold had already settled deep into my bones. "Are you sure?" I finally asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "I don't want to trouble you." The cowboy chuckled softly. If it were trouble, I wouldn't be offering. Then, with a tilt of his head, he extended his gloved hand toward me. "Come on. You'll thank me when you're warm and dry." For a second, I just stared at that hand, rough from work, steady even in the rain. Taking it felt like stepping across a line I couldn't return from, a small choice that somehow carried more weight than I could explain. But the storm pressed against me, relentless, and I realized that refusing him would mean another night of struggle and solitude. So I took it. His grip was firm, grounding, and in one smooth motion, he pulled me up behind him onto the horse. The animal shifted beneath us, powerful and alive, but the cowboy sat so easily that I found myself clinging more to his presence in the saddle. As the horse began moving again, carrying us through the sheets of rain, I couldn't help but wonder at the strangeness of it all. Just minutes ago, I had been stranded, frustrated, and alone. Now, I was being carried away by a stranger, his confidence sheltering me in a way the storm couldn't touch. I didn't know it yet, but that choice to trust him, to follow him home, would mark the beginning of a story I never expected to live. The storm roared around us as a horse carried us down a narrow path I hadn't noticed before. The fields gave way to clusters of trees, their branches thrashing wildly in the wind, until suddenly, through the curtain of rain, a light appeared. It was small at first, flickering in the distance like a beacon, but the closer we rode, the stronger it glowed. Within minutes, the outline of a house emerged, a sturdy, rustic building with smoke curling faintly from its chimney despite the downpour. The warm glow of lanterns spilled in the windows, softening the edges of the storm, and for the first time since the rain had started, I felt something loosen inside me. Relief. The cowboy slowed his horse and guided it toward a wooden gate. As he dismounted, water streamed off his hat and jacket. He turned, offered me a hand once more. My fingers were stiff with cold, but when I gripped his, he pulled me down with ease. "This is home," he said simply, patting the horse before leading it toward a covered shed. "Come on, let's get you inside." I followed him up the steps, my boots squelching with every move. The door creaked open, releasing a wave of warmth that hit me like an embrace. Inside, the house was everything the storm was not: steady, solid, safe. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, their surfaces polished with age. The scent of burning would mix with something rich and savory drifting from the kitchen. A woven rug lay across the floor, frayed at the edges but soft underfoot. "Son, you're back early," a woman's voice called from the kitchen. She stepped into view, her apron dusted with flour, her hair tied back neatly. Her eyes fell on me, drenched, mud-stained, shivering, and without hesitation she grabbed a towel from a nearby chair and pressed it into my hands. "Oh, you poor thing." Get yourself dry before you catch cold. This is my mother, the cowboy explained, unbuttoning his soaked jacket. He was stranded out on the road. I brought him in. Her eyes softened further. Then you did the right thing. No guest leaves this house wet and hungry. She gave me a reassuring nod before returning to the kitchen, her movements quick and practiced. Moments later, a man entered from the adjoining room. Older, his features weathered but his posture strong. His voice was deep, carrying authority even in its calmness. Another traveler caught in the rain? He studied me, his eyes sharp but not unkind. Before I could speak, the cowboy answered for me. Yes, father. He'll stay the night. The father gave a small nod, as though the matter was settled, and then motioned for me to sit by the fire. I lowered myself into the chair, the flames crackling warmly at my side, and for the first time since leaving the school, I began to thaw. Dinner was simple but hearty. Fresh bread, stew thick with vegetables, and warm tea that steamed against my face. I ate quietly, still unsure what to say, while the family spoke around me. Their voices blended with the sounds of the storm outside, creating a cocoon of comfort I hadn't realized I was desperate for. The cowboy sat across from me, his hat now resting on the table, his damp hair falling casually across his forehead. He spoke easily with his parents, his voice carrying the same steady warmth it had when he first found me. Every so often his eyes flicked toward me, checking if I needed anything, but he never pressed. His presence was reassuring, without being overwhelming. After dinner, he stretched and stood. It's been a long day, he said, his tone relaxed. I'll turn in early. Mother, could you show him to the guest room? His mother nodded. Of course. Come with me. I followed her down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. The walls were plain, but the bed was neatly made, and a folded blanket lay at its foot. A single lantern cast a soft glow, chasing away the shadows. You'll be comfortable here, she said kindly. Rest well. The storm will pass by morning. When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the rain hammering the roof, steady and relentless. I should have felt only gratitude for the shelter, the food, the kindness of strangers, but a quiet nervousness lingered in my chest. This was a house full of people I didn't know, yet fate had dropped me here, in their care. I leaned back against the pillow, closing my eyes, and let the warmth of the room seep into me. Whatever the night held, I told myself, at least I wasn't alone anymore. That night, I thought sleep would come easily. The storm still raged outside, but here in the small guest room, wrapped in a blanket and sheltered by strong wooden walls, I should have felt safe. Yet, as I lay on the narrow bed, listening to the rain tapping against the window pane, my mind refused to rest. Perhaps it was the unfamiliarity of the house, or perhaps it was the way the evening had unfolded so quickly, from being stranded and helpless to sitting at a warm table surrounded by strangers. Gratitude filled me, yes, but also a lingering nervousness I couldn't quite name. Time passed in silence, broken only by the shifting of the storm. At some point, I must have drifted into half-sleep, because the sound of a knock startled me. It was soft, almost hesitant, but in the quiet of the night it felt louder than thunder. I sat up, heart thudding, and called out, "Yes?" The door creaked open, and the cowboy's father stepped inside. His presence filled the room, though he carried himself with a gentleness that contrasted with his strong build. The lamplight from the hallway glowed faintly behind him, outlining his frame before he closed the door and left us in the warm flicker of the lantern by my bedside. "I hope I didn't wake you," he said, his voice low. "No, I wasn't asleep," I admitted, brushing a hand to my damp hair. He nodded as if he'd expected that. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, his posture relaxed, though his sharp eyes studied me carefully. For a few moments, he spoke casually about the storm, about how often travelers found themselves stranded this time of year. He told me about the roads, the floods, the way the village survived through the cycles of rain and sun. His voice was steady, almost soothing, like someone used to filling silence without rushing it. I listened, grateful for distraction, and answered when I could. But slowly, his word began to shift. He asked about me, where I came from, why I chose to teach in the village. I told him the truth, that teaching was my calling, though it wasn't the most practical choice, and that sometimes the solitude of it weighed on me. "You must get lonely," he said softly. The way he spoke the word made my chest tighten. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the truth clung to me too closely. Sometimes, I admitted, almost whispering. His eyes softened, and he leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "A young man like you shouldn't have to carry that weight alone." Something in his tone unsettled me, not in a frightening way, but in a way that reached places I usually kept locked away. The silence stretched, not awkward but charged, and then he reached out. His hand, rough from work, settled gently over mine where it rested on the blanket. My breath caught. His touch wasn't forceful. It was deliberate, calm, almost careful. I didn't pull away. Instead, I found myself staring at the contrast of his weathered skin against my own, the quiet strength in his grasp. He spoke again, his voice quieter now. "You remind me of myself many years ago, searching for meaning, hoping someone would see me for who I was, not just what I did." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight, and before I could form words, he lifted his other hand and brushed it lightly across my shoulder. The touch was brief but lingering, leaving behind a warmth that startled me in its tenderness. My heart raced, caught between confusion and something deeper, something unspoken that I didn't dare name. I should have pushed him away, or at least asked him what he meant. But I didn't. Instead, I sat frozen, caught in the strange comfort of being seen so directly. He studied me, his gaze searching but not demanding. "You don't have to hide," he murmured. "Not here. Not tonight." The words sank into me, unsettling and soothing all at once. My breath grew uneven. I felt exposed, yet not unsafe, conflicted, but not fearful. Then, gently, almost as if asking permission, he said, "Take off your shirt." My pulse pounded in my ears. For a moment, I hesitated, caught between the storm inside me and the storm outside. But there was no pressure in his voice, only an invitation. My fingers trembled as I unbuttoned the damp fabric, slipping it off my shoulders and setting it aside. He looked at me, not hungrily, not judgmentally, but with a quiet reverence, as though I were more than a lost, rain-soaked traveler who had stumbled into his home. Slowly, he leaned closer. His hand brushed the side of my face, warm and steady. My eyes fluttered shut just as his lips pressed against mine in the gentlest of kisses. It wasn't demanding. It wasn't rushed. It was soft, deliberate, filled with a tenderness that disarmed every defense I thought I had. And in that fragile moment, I realized that sometimes the connections we fear the most are the ones that make us feel the most alive. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, I sat in the stillness of the room, the sound of rain and thunder wrapping me like a second heartbeat. My lips still tingled from where his had touched mine. It hadn't been long. It hadn't been deep, yet it carried a weight that no amount of rational thought could dismiss. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the restless thud beneath my palm. Confusion swirled in me, heavy as the storm clouds outside. What had just happened? More importantly, why hadn't I pulled away? I told myself I should feel alarm, that this was unexpected, inappropriate even. And yet, when I reached the truth buried under all those rehearsed responses, what I found wasn't fear. It was comfort. His presence had felt protective, almost sheltering, as if in that moment he had seen something fragile inside me that no one else ever had. The gentleness in his touch hadn't demanded anything. It offered something instead. Recognition, warmth, a reminder that I wasn't invisible. That thought lodged itself deep in my chest, painful in its honesty, because the truth was, I had been lonely for a long time, longer than I wanted to admit. My mind drifted back, unbidden, to nights in my small rented room where I lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the world outside, wondering if anyone would ever think of me as worth holding. I remembered walking through crowded streets, surrounded by laughter, friends linking arms, lovers whispering close, and how I always walked just a little faster, head down, as though I could escape the hollow ache of being left out of that simple intimacy. There had been moments, scattered and fleeting, when I longed for a hand on my shoulder, a voice calling me home, someone to choose me without hesitation. But life had taught me to carry my silence, to wear solitude like a coat that fit too tightly yet kept me hidden. And then tonight, in a house that wasn't mine, under a roof that had taken me in from the storm, I had felt something I had only imagined before, to be wanted, not for what I could provide, not for appearances, but for simply existing. The thought both warmed me and unsettled me. I turned the memory of the kiss over my mind, again and again, as if I could decode it by repetition. The way his lips pressed so gently against mine, the way his eyes had searched me first, asking without words if I would let him near. It hadn't been forceful. It hadn't been cruel. It had been tender. And yet, the tenderness didn't erase the questions. What did this mean about me? About who I was, or what I wanted? I had always told myself I knew where my boundaries lay, but now those lines blurred, smudged by the warmth of a moment I couldn't deny. A part of me whispered that it was wrong, that I had stepped into dangerous waters. But another part, the quieter, truer part, whispered that maybe this was the first time I had allowed myself to feel seen. Masculinity had always felt like a performance I was expected to put on, heavy and unyielding. Be strong. Be distant. Do not need, do not break, do not long. And yet here I was, sitting shirtless in a stranger's guest room, realizing that all along I had been craving permission to let down the mask, to admit I wanted closeness, to admit I needed softness, even from another man. I exhaled slowly, burying my face in my hands. Was it wrong to want this? Or was it only human? The rain hammered against the window, relentless and wild, as though urging me to let the storm inside me break free. But I couldn't yet, not fully. Instead, I sat in the silence, clutching the memory of his touch like a secret ember. It frightened me, yes, but it also warmed me in a way nothing else ever had. Maybe tomorrow I would understand. Maybe tomorrow the boundaries would be clearer, or maybe they would vanish altogether. But tonight, in the quiet after the kiss, I allowed myself one fragile truth. I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of what his gentleness revealed in me. I didn't sleep. Not at first. Not even as the storm softened outside into the steady whisper of rain. My thoughts were too loud, circling endlessly around what had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again. The quiet strength, the searching tenderness, the way his eyes had carried both certainty and hesitation. And then, just as I was convincing myself to lie still until morning, there was another gentle knock at my door. I froze, pulse quickening. For a moment, I considered staying silent. But some part of me, the same part that had kept me from pulling away earlier, whispered yes. "Come in," I said, my voice low, uncertain. He stepped inside, not with boldness this time, but with a careful humility, as if he were just as unsure as welcome as I was. The lamp still burned dimly in the corner, painting his features in soft amber shadows. He sat down in a chair by my bed, leaning forward with his hands clasped, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then he sighed, a sound heavy with years. "I shouldn't have done that earlier," he said quietly. "I don't want you to think I meant to take advantage." Something in his honesty softened the tension in my chest. I shook my head slowly. It didn't feel that way. His eyes met mine, searching again, and he nodded. Silence lingered between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like the pause before confession, the kind of silence that begs to be filled. And so it was. He began to talk, at first in fragments, then in whole stories, about the years he had carried this ranch after his wife passed, about raising his children, about how the days had stretched into years without him noticing. He spoke of long nights where the loneliness was sharp and the cold, of how people assume a man of his age and stature has everything under control, when really, he often felt like he was drifting. "I thought time would soften it," he admitted, staring down at his weathered hands. "The emptiness, the longing, but time, it doesn't heal, not really. It just teaches you how to hide it." His words struck something raw in me. I leaned forward, the distance between us shrinking. "I think I know what you mean. For me, it's not time, it's youth. Everyone assumes being young means you're carefree, full of possibility. But sometimes I feel trapped, misunderstood. like I'm already falling behind in a race I don't even want to run. His gaze lifted to mine, steady and unflinching. "You feel alone." The words landed with the weight of truth. I nodded, throat tightening. "Yeah, like no matter how many people are around, I don't really belong to anyone, and maybe no one belongs to me." For a while, we just looked at each other, as though seeing not just the present moment, but the mirrored struggles carried in two very different lives. One older, weathered by time. The other younger, worn down by expectations. And in that recognition, something shifted. We kept talking. The hours slipped by unnoticed. He told me about the dreams he once had. Traveling the world, writing a book, finding a partner who would understand the quieter parts of his soul. Dreams that had dimmed but never fully gone out. In turn, I shared pieces of myself I rarely voice aloud. The way I felt like I was always pretending to be stronger than I was. The nights I had sat awake wondering if anyone would ever truly see me. The ache of wanting more, but never knowing where to begin. The rain faded to silence outside, but the conversation didn't. Words flowed between us like a current we had both been waiting to step into. And through it, the confusion inside me slowly gave way to something else. Not clarity, not certainty, but warmth. A sense that maybe this moment wasn't about defining what I was or what this meant. Maybe it was about finally being in the presence of someone who understood the quiet ache of loneliness and choosing, for once, not to bear it alone. At some point, I noticed how close we had drifted. His chair had edged nearer to the bed. My arm rested against the side, and his hand lingered only inches away. There was no urgency, no demand, only the possibility of connection. Should either of us choose to bridge it? I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know what choices would come after. But as I looked into his tired, steady eyes, I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. Safe, seen. And for the first time that night, the storm inside me grew quiet. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the light. It wasn't the harsh glare of midday, but the soft, forgiving glow of morning. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, painting long, golden stripes across the floor. Outside, I could still smell the dampness of the earth, the freshness that only comes after a long night of rain. The storm had broken, and the world looked rinsed clean, as though it too had needed the tears. I lay there for a while, listening. The house carried its usual quiet creaks, but beneath them was the faint clatter of dishes, the low hum of voices. My stomach gave a small growl, reminding me I hadn't eaten since before the storm. With a deep breath, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and pulled on a clean shirt. The kitchen was warm with the smell of coffee and frying eggs. The father stood at the stove, spatula in hand, while his son sat at the table, leaning back in his chair with that lazy cowboy ease I'd come to expect. For a moment, I froze in the doorway, wondering if last night would hang in the air like smoke, visible, undeniable. But then the son glanced up, grinned, and said, "Morning. You survived the storm." Just like that, the tension I'd braced for never came. I slid into a chair across from him, and the father set down a plate in front of me, piled high with eggs and toast. His hand brushed the table as he pulled away. A small, almost imperceptible touch that might have meant nothing to anyone else. But to me, it carried a quiet reassurance. "Eat," he said simply. His tone was steady, ordinary, as though the night before had been nothing more than another conversation. And maybe that was what made it so easy. The three of us sat together, passing the salt, sipping coffee, trading remarks about the weather and the state of the muddy road outside. The cowboy teased his father about fussing too much over the eggs, and the father gave him a dry look that made me smile into my toast. It was all so normal, so natural, that I almost laughed at how I had dreaded facing this morning. Yet under that ease, something had shifted inside me. I felt lighter, as though some invisible weight had been lifted during the night. The confusion hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer pressed against me with the same urgency. Instead, there was a quiet clarity, a sense that I had crossed into a new space within myself. The father caught my eye once as he reached for his mug. His gaze lingered only a second, steady and unreadable, before moving on. But that was enough. It told me he remembered too, not with regret, not with shame, but with the same calm acceptance he carried into every part of his life. We finished breakfast, and the cowboy stretched, pushing back from the table. "Well, I guess I should check the fences before the ground dries up too much," he said, grabbing his hat on the way out. The screen door slapped shut behind him, leaving the two of us in the kitchen's warm quiet. For a heartbeat, the silence stretched. Then the father set his mug down and gave me the faintest of nods, like a promise unspoken. I didn't need words. The sunlight streaming across the table was enough. The world outside was fresh, washed clean, and for the first time in a long while, so was I. The rain had ended, but its memory lingered. As I pedaled my bike back into the village, mud clinging to the tires, I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder at the distant hills where the cowboy's house stood. The storm had left me shaken, but it had also led me somewhere I hadn't expected. Into a home, into warmth, into something I still didn't have words for. Life in the village returned to its rhythm quickly. Children ran barefoot through puddles, merchants swept water from their doorsteps, and the chatter of daily trade filled the air. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside me, something had. At night, as I lay in my small rented room, I replayed the hours I'd spent in that rustic kitchen, the laughter over breakfast, and the quiet understanding that had passed between me and the father. I told myself it was foolish to dwell on it, that it had only been one night brought on by circumstance, by loneliness, by the strange vulnerability storms seemed to uncover. And yet, my thoughts drifted back to them, again and again. A few days later, with the roads dry and the sky clear, I found myself turning my bike not toward a market, but back toward those hills. This time, I wasn't forced there by rain or fear. This time, it was a choice. The cowboy spotted me first, riding in at a trot on his horse. He grinned wide, pulling up beside me. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," he said. "Roads that bad in the village?" I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "No, I just thought I'd come by." He didn't press, only nodded, like he understood more than he let on. By the time we reached the house, his father was on the porch, leaning against the railing with a book in hand. He looked up, and for a moment our eyes caught. There was no surprise in his gaze, only a quiet welcome, as though he had already known I would return. Inside, the warmth was the same as I remembered. The scent of wood, the crackle of the fire, the unhurried rhythm of life that made the place feel alive. We talked through the afternoon, the cowboy sharing stories of ranch work, his father listening more than speaking, and me caught between them, comfortable in a way I hadn't realized I could be. Days passed like that. I didn't stay overnight again, not at first. I came and went, helping with chores, sharing meals, learning the slow work of mending fences or hauling water. With the cowboy, there was laughter and camaraderie, friendship built on sweat and teasing words. With his father, there was something quieter, heavier. When we walked together at dusk, or when his hand brushed mine while passing a tool, I felt that same thread from the storm night tug at me, stronger each time. Nothing was rushed. There were no declarations, no stolen moments forced into shadows. Just a steady unfolding, like the way the earth drinks up rain, slowly, until everything is greener, without you noticing how it happened. One evening, as I packed up to leave, the cowboy clapped me on the back. "Guess you're part of the place now," he said with a grin. His words carried no suspicion, no edge, only ease, as if he already considered me family. And maybe that's what was becoming. When I rode back to the village under the setting sun, I felt it clearly. This wasn't just a visit anymore. It was the start of something that didn't have to be explained, only lived. A new beginning, not built on storms and chance, but on choice. Looking back, it still amazes me how a single storm could change the course of my life. At first, it had seemed like nothing more than an inconvenience, a barrier between me and the safety of home. The rain, the mud, the struggle with my bike, it all felt like nature was pushing me to my limits. I had been tired, frustrated, and more alone than I wanted to admit. But the storm had also led me down a road I never would have chosen on my own. It guided me to the cowboy's house, to the warmth of a fire, to the kindness of a family who had no reason to welcome me, but did anyway. And Beyond all of that, it introduced me to a connection I hadn't been seeking but had needed all along. In the days that followed, I realized how much lighter I felt. The loneliness that had shadowed me for so long didn't vanish overnight, but it softened. There was comfort now, a place where I was wanted, not for what I could do or who I pretended to be, but simply for being myself. With the cowboy, I found laughter and friendship. With his father, I discovered something deeper, a closeness that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. I didn't expect it, and maybe that's why it mattered so much. Life has a strange way of surprising us when we're most vulnerable. Just when I thought I had been caught in nothing but struggle, I found myself in a moment of grace. Now, when I ride to the village or look out toward the hills, I no longer see isolation. I see possibility. I see the beginning of a story that doesn't need to follow anyone else's script. And most of all, I see the quiet truth that sometimes happiness doesn't come from chasing it down. It finds us, hidden in the very storms we thought would break us. The storm had ended, but in its wake, it left me something I had been missing for far too long: connection, warmth, and a peace I could finally call my own.